Drive Time on BCFM 93.2.
Now, as promised, what would a major euro-dollar crash look like? Old Labour Oxford economist Martin Summers. First of all, I mean, we're looking at a sort of general, a couple of scenarios here. Looking at what would trigger it, what would the financial crash actually look like on the day, what would it look like after a few days, after a few weeks, and what would a long-term recovery look like? So, first of all, the trigger, possibly a military incident, maybe real weapons of mass destruction on a city, a nuclear weapon, chemical weapons, biological weapons, possibly, something like a United States aircraft carrier being sunk. But the important thing is this is sending a message around the world of kind of TV pictures of shock.
Yeah, I mean, when we had the crash in 1987, it was pictures of a burning oil rig in the Gulf, which caused the immediate shock. But of course, the fact is that we are on the brink of major wars, and that they do cause crashes. I mean, in the first weeks of the First World War, the stock market collapsed. But of course, the market can collapse under its own steam, as we've just been hearing. With or without a military provocation, it can just collapse anyway.
But I think what we've been discussing over previous weeks is that we're building up to a situation, particularly in the Middle East. Elsewhere, there's the North and South Korea tension. There's tension between China and Japan. But in any of these situations, it wouldn't take a lot to actually trigger a euro crisis to actually turn into a crash. And that's one of the things that has been one of the kind of unintended consequences of this whole euro crisis that's been rolling on the last couple of years. Is it's led to a situation where something else might intervene to really tip it over the edge.
Well, there's a whole spectrum of things which could tip it over the edge, and that's why I firmly predict that it will be tipped over the edge, because something or other will turn up and cause it. And it's interesting that you call it a euro-dollar crash. Now, that is good, because that actually is the point. It's not about the euro, it's about the banking system. If an individual country, even Cyprus, which is worth 0.2% of European GDP, crashes out of the euro, that will bring credit default swaps, which are owned by banks in Germany and Britain, for example, into play. And at that point, you get a catastrophic failure of the system. This is one of the arguments, for example, against nuclear power. It's a complicated system, and if it breaks down, as we saw at Fukushima, you then get a completely uncontrollable situation. Now, what we've allowed to happen in the financial markets is exactly that. We've been building this bonfire now for 30 or 40 years, piling more pallets on it, throwing more petrol on it, and now, of course, we're striking matches next to it. Now, of course, this bonfire should never have been built. The separation, for example, between retail banking and investment banking was brought in the 1930s in the US, Britain and elsewhere, precisely to avoid this kind of situation. But Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, the Conservative Party here, the Republicans in the United States, said, oh, no, we don't need that kind of old-fashioned regulation anymore. Why don't we just bring it all into one big bonfire? And, of course, if you bring it all into one big bonfire, that big bonfire can catch fire, and that's the problem.
OK, well, the military incident, one of the reasons I mention it is because it actually would be quite convenient for the financial powers to be able to then say, oh, well, actually, it wasn't our fault, it was the fault of this military incident.
Indeed, and this is why I think we shouldn't concentrate too much on it. You see, Cyprus, for example, is a financial incident, but it's also a military incident because the Russians are basically being drawn into fighting in Syria. It's the Russians who've got their money in Cyprus, and the Russian businesses and the oligarchs and so on who may have lost their money. But of course, Cyprus has got gas, so they were talking with Gazprom about having some gas, and it's also been hinted that Putin was saying, well, can we have some bases in Cyprus? Now, can you imagine if the British are kicked out of Cyprus, the Russians put their bases in, ready for the war in Syria? Now, the point is that all of these things are actually working together. The military situation and the financial situation are both on red alert as we go into the spring of 2013.
Okay, leaving the trigger and looking at the financial crash itself, stock markets would be very quickly, and there would be a kind of contagious collapse because of the electronic nature of these things. There would probably be insider dealing, large amounts of money to be made at this point. Have insiders put their money out of the casino, out of shares and cash, into commodities and property? Well, yes, they have. Lots of money has been going into gold, Hong Kong property, classic cars, fine art, rare coins, stamps, fine wine and jewellery. Markets would be quickly suspended and banks would close their doors almost immediately. Nowadays, that would be almost instantaneous. Cash points would either quickly run out of cash or simply be closed by the banks. Card transactions may be suspended immediately too. That means eventually you can't get at your money. Your savings, can't use it for anything. food, or for example to buy a large item like car insurance, tax, your bills, you wouldn't be able to pay them, but the government says don't panic, Corporal Jones.
Well, of course, that's the government's job, is to say don't panic, and in a sense you expect them to say that. But the fact of the matter is that they've had 4 years since the 2008 credit crunch to get the house in order. They should have basically, if they're going to prop the banks up, you go in there and kick them to pieces, arrest the top people, send them down, take all their money off them, and you really get a grip on the situation. But we haven't got a grip on the situation. The politicians basically are bought by the bankers, and that includes the left-wing politicians as well as the right-wing politicians. So we've had 4 years of hanging around while they carry on looting. And of course what will eventually happen is they will walk away with the loot. But of course the society as a whole will then bear the consequences. I mean world society will then bear the consequences. And of course all of the brushfire wars that are burning out of control will then get a whole slash of petrol on top of them, and off we'll go.